everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are so excited to have you and our wonderful guests. Tonight, we're going to be talking about advocacy, and it's such an important topic because in today's times, there are so many things that we need to be talking about and receiving resources for. So join me in welcoming our two guests this evening. I'm going to start with our first guest, which is Ben Vonachen. He is a senior director of the Congressional and Federal Relations with APA's Advocacy Office, where he's specifically charged with managing gun violence prevention, policy and policing criminal justice portfolios for the associations. He also directs APA's congressional and executive branch fellowship programs. He has been with APA since 2010, where he served as a legislative assistant in the U.S. House of Representatives for the Democratic Representative Ed Perlmutter of Colorado. He holds a master's in political science from the University of Colorado, Denver, and a bachelor in digital media from the University of Denver. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. We are also joined by Doris Parfaite-Claude. She's the director of a grassroots engagement campaign with APA's Advocacy Office, where she is in charge of growing and strengthening APA's grassroots network. She joined APA in July of this year, and prior to that, she served as a federal advocacy and research manager at ANCOR. Before joining ANCOR, she worked as a legislative assistant for the NALEO Educational Fund and a polling analyst for the Lincoln Park Strategies. Doris has a master's in public policy from Georgetown and an undergraduate degree in politics from Brandeis University. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So I'd love to start with, how are you feeling? How are you guys doing today?
You want to start that one off, Doris?
We're doing great. We're excited to be here. It's always a great opportunity to help people be more comfortable in being vocal voices of the nation. So yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, echo those thoughts. Certainly, I'm ready for the holiday, but it's a long way to go, as a lot of professions. Everybody's going to try to jam everything in before the end of the year. So it's been a busy time, but we're wading our way through it.
Yes, I do imagine it's crunch period right now, and I can't imagine what it's been like for you guys over the last couple of years. And I'm just wondering, as you see your patterns and see kind of how things are shaping up, through this pandemic time, how did you first start getting into advocacy work? Like, what was your drive? What brought you here, and how does advocacy shape your work in general?
Doris, you want to start off, or?
Sure. Well, what got me interested originally in undergrad, I thought I was going to become a lawyer. Because either way, I wanted to kind of help make a difference in the world around me. And then some very smart professors of mine kind of made a budgetary argument that a master's in public policy was 1 year less of graduate school to pay for. It was a very compelling argument for me. And I started looking into lobbying, which, it kind of has this kind of scary reputation, right? Like these dark shadowy forces that shape the democracy. But really, any group under the sun, it has a lobbyist group, and it's about being able to speak out and being able to make your voice heard amongst a very loud din in the background. I found in particular, as I started working as a legislative assistant, that I was good at making people feel comfortable with this. And that was honestly one of the most fun parts, right? You had to see somebody come back from an advocacy day. It's their first time ever having met a member of Congress. And for once, they actually feel that it's not such a hopeless situation out here in Washington, D.C. And that's kind of what prompted me to continue at Anchor, starting to work on a grassroots program, and now coming to APA to do the same.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and actually fairly similar to some extent. My direct lineage of family, every man has either been a lawyer or a bartender up until me. But I can say that at least now I work on laws. And, getting out of undergrad, it was a scary time of being trying to figure out what I want to do with life. and I had a communications and graphic design background, but that wasn't really where I wanted to go. And really, there was a congressional race right where I grew up, and I'd always, been passionate about politics. And that congressional race came down to 121 votes, and the candidate who I wanted to win didn't. And it just made me think that had there been maybe 10 to 15 other people like me who were passionate about it but didn't get involved in that race, that could have been an entirely different outcome, especially when several votes in Congress came down to 1 or 2 votes, and that member was not voting the way that I wanted. So that started the wheels for me. So I started getting involved in some congressional campaigns, and one of the guys who I worked for won, and that was Ed Perlmutter from Colorado, and he took me out to DC with him to work on his staff in the House of Representatives. So.
Wow, such an amazing journey for both of you. And I love that, Doris, you mentioned that you are helping people feel comfortable. You're right. I think there is such a negative connotation with the word lobbyist, and there's not very much that I think people really know about lobbying and lobbyists. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. Could you both speak to, and I'm going to, Doris, ask you to start with talking a little bit about some of the advocacy work that you've done either in the past or that you're currently working on.
Sure. So I've had a bit of a winding road because, I think in DC you can have the option, either you develop a skill set and it gets applied from issue to issue, or you become really knowledgeable about a particular set of issues and you dive deep and you kind of just continue the road on that way. I'm more of the jack of all trades who takes the skills with her. So I started working on immigration. That was kind of my first meaty job at the NETO Educational Fund. It was immigration reform and voting rights, those big bills in 2012 that unfortunately are still in the works right now. And then after that, disability issues. And that was really helping people with disabilities who want to live in the community find ways to get the Medicaid program to support them in doing so. And with APA, it's a much broader range, and I'm really here to facilitate the lobbyist work in helping connect people to their lawmakers and whatnot. So, I'll shift things over to Ben in terms of the actual work that's being done at APA.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and sort of a similar arc. When I was on the Hill, I worked for a freshman member. So it was really all hands on deck. So I had such a wide portfolio of issues because there's really a lot of times, I would say around 5 legislative staffers, if less than that, on a Hill when you have to cover every issue that comes your way. You don't get to vote on all of the issues you're comfortable with for these members of Congress. So that exposed me, which was good training for APA, where I have done so many different portfolios for the association. I was mainly associated with the public interest directorate, so a lot of the social issues related to APA, and headed up the disability portfolio for a long time, as well as immigration at one point, and led over to my current portfolios that I've been doing a lot of work on, which is gun violence prevention, policing, criminal justice work. And so that's been the breadth of what I've worked on lately.
Well, it sounds like you guys are very active and there's a lot to be worked on right now. And I imagine there's a lot of buzz. Unfortunately, we've had some situations occur in the news as of recently around gun violence, and just now it's back in the mainstream of, not that it really left, but there's a lot of talk and buzz about how we manage gun violence or guns. And of course, whenever there is an issue with guns, the next thing you hear is mental health and what was the person's mental health. So I'm curious from your perspectives, and Ben, we're going to start with you. What issues have you seen come up with therapists around advocacy?
Quite a bit. And it's such a broad range. My joke is that my job would be much easier if I worked for the podiatrist as opposed to the psychologist, because the human mind carries with it such an ocean of issues that are relevant to psychology's expertise. And so we, as an office, definitely have trouble narrowing down exactly where to put our resources, because there are so many issues that we could be weighing in on. But typically we're divided amongst 4 different areas of issues: the practice side, so reimbursement, telehealth, the regulations surrounding that. Then we have the education and workforce side. So a lot of student debt issues as it relates to psychology, and also just making sure that there are opportunities for psychologists as they get out of their trainings. And then the third area of focus for a lot of our team is the science. So making sure there's federal research dollars so that the researchers can do their work. And that's specifically advocating for like the Department of Defense, the Veterans Administration, National Science Foundation, or various different agencies. And then the fourth area, which is the area that I had worked in, is the public interest, which is a lot of the population health, whether it relates to women's health, LGBTQ health, as well as socioeconomic status, ethnic minority affairs, and several other population areas, but also the societal issues that psychology can weigh in on, like suicide prevention and just so many other different areas as well, like policing and as they arise that need psychology's expertise to make a difference.
Wow. I mean, that is a breadth of like coverage on multiple topics, and they are really big topics. Everything has a need, and I'm just kind of curious about, managing that, and also where you see there are breakdowns in communication or challenges. I'm just kind of curious how you work through all of that. And Doris, I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the issues that you're seeing, and are they similar or are they different?
So just by sheer function of me coming in July, right around the time when APA was getting started around a reimbursement issue, on a campaign around a reimbursement issue, that's kind of been where I've been more. Thankfully, it's actually kind of been a silver linings situation where the CMS rule that we were weighing in on actually did yield some good changes, especially in the area of telehealth. So I actually kind of came in at a good moment. I would say, even though there's a big breadth of issues, generally, if you're in any given field of psychology, it still helps to weigh in because everything's kind of interconnected at some level, right? If one part of the government is not working, even if you're not receiving payments from that particular program, it's still affecting your population. Therefore, it's going to be affecting either your community, your neighbors, your clients. So, yes, there are issues, and it makes it easy for us to prioritize based on what's kind of bubbling up in either Congress or the federal government. But in general, the more we all kind of link arms and work together on any issue that we think could be of interest to anyone we know, the stronger we'll be as a field overall. And, Ben, do you maybe kind of want to dive into how APA structures its priorities across, like where we're a unique voice versus a coalition voice? Because I think that might help.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a diversity of factors, keeping in mind that, we are a membership organization, and we have to adhere to the governance that is given to us, both through APA resolutions as well as the committees that are elected through APA, and working with the divisions in APA and other stakeholders. And it's also the outside factors that come in. What is hot in Congress's plate? It's not going to be the same issue every year, and we have to strike while the iron is hot on a lot of issues, or else we lose that boat that is our way to create policy. And then also there's just a lot of outside stimuli as it relates to news factors. An incident like the George Floyd incident, changes the tone in Congress and society, and that takes a greater precedent when you really have momentum to build on issues such as that.
Wow. I mean, just thinking in the last 2 years, there have been a number of events that I think have probably put mental health into the forefront, and not just in the sense of like funding, like we need funding for mental health, but a lack of access. And so I'm kind of curious about your perspectives around what you're seeing when therapists are kind of engaging in advocacy work. Like, there's so many pros for therapists to be engaged, and then there are also cons. And I'm wondering if you can speak to what some of those pros are and what some of those cons are that you might share with them about being active advocates.
Sure. Do you want me to kick this one off, Doris?
Sure.
Okay. It's really interesting, especially if you talk to some of my former colleagues and some current colleagues who have been around decades, APA, and just the paradigm shift that has occurred in Congress and probably society as a whole about mental health and the acceptance of it, because it's really been put in a new, very realistic scope, especially with the pandemic, where we can see the people around us who have really been affected negatively, and a lot of the societal issues where mental health plays such a key role in what we need going forward to fund. And so, I mean, I definitely remember and it might have been my first or second year, a congressman, I had a prominent APA member with me talking about that voodoo that you guys do. And, but yet several months down the line, he had a lot of issues in his district as it related to mental health, and his constituents were the ones reaching out to him, and that was changing his mind to the point where he was proactively reaching back out to us, because it really sometimes just takes a personal experience for people to really begin to accept that mental health is a priority that our nation should be investing in far more than we do, and that we're in the middle of crises because we haven't invested the way we should have.
I mean, thank you for that. Like, of course, me being a therapist and a psychologist, I'm always going to say, like, we should be investing in that at the forefront all the time. But I also understand that change takes time, and it's not like, in some ways it does kind of feel like therapy, because it seems like lots of issues take time to get through Congress. And I am going to apologize for the ding that you might hear in the background. There's a notification that I cannot seem to turn off. So pardon that. But I did want to just think about like that process of getting changes made. Sometimes it seems super slow, and sometimes it seems super quick. So I'm wondering if, Doris, if you could start with this, and tell me if this is an appropriate question for you. For many therapists who are interested in advocacy, like, this is a total like gray zone. It's completely nebulous. So what is the process, in advocacy development or getting started? How would you recommend to therapists to start this process?
Well, there's a lot of layers to that, actually. So, I would say start small, start local, start personal, right? Like, all politics is fundamentally about what you want to see change for the better in your life. It can seem overwhelming, right? When you're looking at all these bills that talk about like changing the educational system, changing how the government funds mental health, like how do you address policing? It's paralyzing, but start small. What's an issue you care about, either in your local council, in your newspaper, just something that matters to you. Do your research on it, and then start thinking through like where you want to see that change happen. So is it a city issue that's bothering you? I kind of read through your newspaper, see who are the key players on it, and start thinking through how you would tell them a story about how this would be better for their community. And then that's when you kind of start reaching out. You can schedule a meeting, and really at any level of government, this process kind of follows through, right? The same steps that you would take to reaching out to your local council member, you can use them to reach out to your congressional office, to a state legislator. It's kind of all that same point. What's really more important is thinking about the story you want to tell. Why does it matter? Why do they need to take action? Or what happens if they don't take action? And why is your voice important in this? Do you have a particular insight? Is this affecting you as a human being? Is it something that you've been trained professionally to think about? So that kind of level, what kind of story you want to tell and who you want to tell it to. And once you've got that figured out, it'll really honestly flow. There's no shortage of organizations on any given topic, including APA, especially APA. not to be a little bit shameless here, that can help you then like tie it to a concrete issue, tie it to a bill. You're not alone in this ever. You'll be it just even posting on Facebook, you'll see like a whole bunch of your friends are going to chime in immediately on anything that you post, right? Like you are not alone. And if you want to start taking action, you've kind of identified the issue, you've identified the general direction you want to go in. An association will help you find who to talk to, what bills to look at, what steps of the process are. And we actually, I'm going to very briefly show this, but you guys did not invite me here to read through slides, but here are all the different ways in which you can engage with APA. You can go on our website just to kind of see what we're doing. You can look in your inbox to see what's coming from division leadership, or you can connect with the lobbyist directly. We'll start with the main inbox, and then the lobbyist that's relevant to the issue you're wanting to work on will reach out to you. So that'll kind of give you a starting point with us. And then there's a whole little menu of actions. I'll say if you're a beginner, start kind of with the chime in side, which is contributing to volume that others are already creating and keeping it short and simple. So a few messages, but just showing, hey, I am part of this wave of people who care about this. And then a more intermediate stage will be building bridges. You're starting to build relationships as an individual, or you can start like taking a more prominent role once you become more comfortable working with other people to elevate their voices. It really just kind of depends on your comfort level. And I'm not really going to dive in much deeper than that because, again, you didn't bring me here to read slides, but there's starting points and there's levels, and we can walk you through every step of the way.
And can I ask really quickly, do you recommend that for those who are members of APA, should they become a member of APAC as well? Because that is an option whenever you renew. Do you want to be part of that group, which I think is APA's lobbyists, if I'm correct or incorrect, please?
So APA services is, my understanding is when you become an APA member, you automatically become a member of APA services. And it's really just a legal distinction. The services is what does the lobbying, but for membership purposes, it's the same thing.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's mainly for taxation reasons to have the C3 and the C6, but same not separate organizations working tandem together under the APA banner, essentially.
And Ben, did you also want to add your voice to like the process in terms of how psychologists should get started if they're interested?
Sure, absolutely. And I think Doris made a good point about joining organizations like APA. And in particular, I think a lot of times when you're thinking about, whether you're joining APA for the first time or renewing your membership, you're often thinking about it in the sense of what is APA giving me? What am I getting out of it? But the advocacy side is really taking that skill set that you've refined and spent so much of your life and dedicating to and giving it back to society through advocacy and joining with your fellow psychologists to make a difference, so that a lot of the reason why you probably became a therapist in the first place was to help people. And, as a therapist, you're generally doing it in one-on-one or small groups, but this is a way to engage on a societal level. A lot of the issues that your clients are seeing day to day that are impacting them, you can make a difference from the outside to affect that, so that future generations aren't going through a lot of what a lot of the people you are seeing day in, day out are, and where you can really use your perspective to help people.
So kind of thinking about that, like you guys have outlined this wonderful process of how they can connect with APA and start looking at, what's already out there and what, efforts they can support or lend their voice to. I'm also curious if there are things that you feel like they should know going into this. And if so, what are some of those things? And like you've talked about how they should go about it, but I think sometimes there are always little nuggets or gems that would be good for clinicians to know as they get started in the process. What might those be?
You want me to kick it off first, or would you like to?
Sure, kick it off, and then I'll fill in all the.
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway message is that it's okay to feel unsure of yourself and going into this. It's not what you have trained to do. But you'll often find, and this is what I hear so often from psychologists that they say once they actually do the Hill visits and they have met with legislators and whatnot, they're like, wow, I was like, the skill set that I acquired as a psychologist translated so well and so easily once I got in and got over my nerves to get started. So just know early on, it is kind of a nerve-wracking experience, but that's where APA and other organizations are there to help you. We have such a variety of trainings throughout the years, stuff that's online as well. And that's something that we would really love for those who are watching this call to engage with in the future, to start to join with our office when we do giant Hill days, where we take APA members up to Capitol Hill or virtually now with the pandemic, and January 6th plays a role in a little bit of that as well, not fully open. But and just know that it's a learning process. When I do advocacy trainings, I normally have to start it off by saying, it's important to know your audience, but I'm never going to know my exact audience going into this training, because some people are going to say, Ben, I learned a lot of this government stuff when I was in grade school. And other people are going to be like, Ben, I learned this when I was in grade school. How do you expect me to remember every single aspect of how our government works? And so everybody starts off in a different place, but you get there quickly. And it's very invigorating once you do start making headway with your visits and your advocacy. So
nice. How about for you, Doris?
I'll piggyback a bit off Ben, because it is a very valid point that while you might not feel that you've been trained specifically for advocacy, the skill set that you have from being a psychologist is exactly what you need, right? I was actually talking about this with one of our members who was explaining when he testifies, he already knows how to speak to people in a calming manner. He knows how to sort through complex information, to present it in a simpler way that somebody can grasp who has not been versed in the topics very easily. He knows how to kind of wait people out and hear them out so he can get to what's really working at them. Well, that skill set is very similar when you're talking to a member of Congress, when you're talking to a state legislator, to your local councilman. I think in terms of like the nitty-gritty of like when you first start engaging, there's a few things that nobody really fully expects. Some of it is just the speed at which, well, rather the hurry up and wait pattern of it, right? So you'll have like 25 minutes to be able to book this meeting as fast as possible when you first hear from the scheduler, or they move on and they give your slot to somebody else. And then that meeting will be a month later. Or you'll go in and you might only have 15 minutes, and really that's probably the most realistic expectation when you're starting in the engagement. You might not have more than 15 minutes to make your case. But after that, you might also never get rid of that staffer, because they will keep coming back if they start building trust with you for more answers, and then you'll have more time, and the relationship will build very organically and slowly. So it's hard to map out and give a process for something that's going to vary by the personalities of people involved. But it's the one true fast rule that there can be is just to be very honest about everything. So if you don't know an answer, that's perfectly okay. They don't expect you to know any specifics of, if you're coming in saying, I care about this issue, they're not going to expect you to know exactly the 5 bills that are the most relevant to that issue. Just say, I don't know, this is why I think it matters. I can connect you to somebody who can give you those answers. The more you're truthful and the more that you follow up with accurate information because you've had to do your research or because you've connected them with the right people, the more that trust will build, and the more you'll feel more comfortable, and the more you'll have opportunities. It's a muscle, and the more you exercise it without injuring it at the start, the stronger it'll get and the more comfortable you'll be.
Thank you for that. I love the fact that you said the more you use it without injuring it at the start. And I think sometimes that is an issue when we feel so passionate about something. We just want to see change now. And like maybe sometimes we do come on too strong, or like the issue's we're not seeing changes as quickly as we'd like them to be. So I do appreciate the idea of continuously using that muscle and strengthening it so that it helps promote change. And with that, I'm kind of curious for Ben, let's start with you. What's working well in your advocacy work?
I think quite a bit recently, just because a lot of the pandemic has put a new focus on so many issues that we've advocated for years. Now that people are seeing the mental health effects that have taken a hold of a lot of society. And I think the new day and age of doing advocacy via Zoom as opposed to going face to face and shaking hands has its advantages that is and has made advocacy a little bit more accessible in a lot of ways. That the constituent in say Nebraska doesn't have to fly to DC to meet with that legislative staffer, because that legislative staffer is meeting with me on Zoom and I'm in DC a couple blocks down the street. So that is something that is making what seemed like a distant possibility become a reality far more often.
And to piggyback a bit on that, I would say actually it's probably easier to get a meeting now in some regard because of that. You're not having to wait as long to be able to get those times when everybody can come to DC and do a fly-in, which means the staffers aren't having these entire months where 50 groups are bringing in 50 people to talk to them. So they're able to manage their time better, which makes them far more willing to hop onto a Zoom. They don't have as much transition time between meetings. They don't have to worry about walking their, if they wrapped up this meeting in time, are they going to be able to walk their boss to do a vote, which is 20 minutes of their time that's gone, right? All those constraints are kind of off their back now. So this is actually one of the great things. It is a bit easier to get meetings now.
And Doris, kind of thinking about that, I'm wondering, so now that there's an ease, I don't want to jinx it, but now that there seems like there's an ease of scheduling for some of our legislative members, what have you noticed in terms of changes with mental health advocacy? Would you say that you feel like we're moving forward? And Doris, I was going to have you start if that's okay, and then we can jump to you.
So it's a little hard for me to answer just because I've only been at APA for 5.5 months. So I just don't have that much to compare to.
No problem. We can pivot that to Ben. If you can go ahead and share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a positive outlook overall, especially as it relates to mental health. It's the yin and yang of Congress, because I feel like other areas are far more contentious than they ever were now, but mental health is not one of those areas. But yet, by the same token, we have such a long way to go to really get society to equate mental health with health generally and provide the funding that is necessary, and do it far more or far upstream, as opposed to trying to come in at the back end when the problems have already presented themselves. And that's something that we see over and over again on such a variety of issues that have a mental health connection. So, so a lot of issues that, we have fought for years are really the stuff you don't hear about in a lot of ways, because so much of our news media focuses on the really contentious stuff that you don't hear about the progress that they are making. And so I feel like that's why this is a real ideal time to start to become involved in advocacy if you haven't yet.
So in terms of finding out about what those new things are, because it isn't always, publicized on our local or even our nationwide media outlets, would you say that going to APA is the best place to find out about them? Or where would you direct our clinicians to go to find out more?
The first thing I would do is to sign up for our advocacy newsletter once a week, where you'll get a great snapshot of all the things that APA is fighting for, along with the broader mental health community, and what is really pertinent to Congress right now. And on top of that, too, I think sometimes it's getting away from some of the more partisan media and really going for news organizations that are focused on Capitol Hill subjects as it relates to federal policies. So like the Hill, Roll Call, Politico, that are more trade oriented and are just the facts of what's going on and aren't editorializing as much. So that gives you a pretty good view of what's pertinent to Congress, but also really the lowdown of what's moving or what's not.
Awesome. So with all of these things that you guys have been working on and the changes that are happening, and even some of the new things that you're working towards making a reality, I'm curious, what are you excited about? And Doris, since we pivoted to Ben, I'm going to start with you this time.
There's actually a lot to be excited about. Even though it's going to be chaotic, there's going to be a lot of different things coming up with the Better Business, with the Build Back Better bill, which it's BBB, so I keep wanting to calling it the Better Business Bureau. But we're going to see opportunities to kind of just touch across the whole spectrum of issues, be it education, be it workforce, be it telehealth even. So it's going to be a slog, and both sides are going to be slamming each other very hard, but eventually we will see some very good things come out of that, so I am excited.
Sorry, I'm toggling my mute. So Ben, for you, what are you excited about? You're on mute.
Literally, you were just talking about the mute button, and I didn't. The light bulb did not go out to turn off my own mute button. I am really just excited when I engage with a lot of the new staff who are on Capitol Hill, and it takes me back to when I first started on Capitol Hill, and I still get the shivers when I walk by the Capitol, and see that really a monument to our democracy. But just seeing those new staffers who are coming in, who are so passionate about the issues and working across partisan lines to get really meaningful accomplishments across the finish line. I think that renews me quite a bit and downplays the cynicism that can form about our government and a lot of the partisan difficulties that have ensnared a lot of Congress.
So I just have a question just from your experiences. And I know, Doris, you've only been there for a short while, but I do think maybe you can speak to this too. I'm curious if you both see or feel that Congress is as divisive as our media kind of portrays them to be. Do you feel like with working with our legislators that it feels like it's so contentious on every issue? Or do you feel that maybe the news is hyping that up a little bit too much?
You want to start off, Doris, or you want me to?
Sure. I think some of it will depend on the issue, and some of it will depend on the particular personalities of members of Congress. Some of the drama that you see about specific members of Congress going at each other, that's not underestimated at all. But overall, a lot of the work is actually done by the policy staff that Ben was talking about, and it is an exciting time when the new staff come, but also when they have those periods between when they can talk to each other. Most people come to Washington, D.C. to make a difference for the better. It's easy to lose all of that in the newspapers, but the people who are going to sit across from you, across the table from you at a meeting, are people who really genuinely believe that the government has the power to change lives. And so behind all of that, there's always going to be political moments, especially in an election year, but underneath all of that, there are the people who are determined to make a difference. And so underneath that current, there is actually a lot of room to combat cynicism, and there is not as much acrimony. The fact of it is, if you go into the key Senate committees, the staffers from across the aisle are on first name basis, and they're chummy, and they all have rip-roaring arguments about specific subtopics, but overall they understand that government is important, they need to function, and they need to do their work and move forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And is there anything that you want to add, Ben?
I think Doris said that really beautifully. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times when it comes to a lot of the question that you said. But overall, I'm still very optimistic that what is getting accomplished and can get accomplished. And I definitely have to take a step back every now and then when I get bogged down in the negativity that can occur, and just remember the interactions I am having on a day-to-day basis, and seeing that so much of the staff and a lot of the members too, the camaraderie, and it's still there, and they still do accomplish some amazing things on a day-to-day basis. But that's not always the most exciting thing to be running in newspapers or news segments about. So,
Right.
And I think another thing that the news cycle doesn't quite capture is that it can take a long time for an idea to take root. So, you'll see these bills that have these very humiliating public defeats, and it kind of sounds like the idea that's behind them. So, a certain type of financing for a program targeting, vulnerable populations. Like, it might seem like, okay, we stop caring about poor people. Like, that program died, and like Congress has moved on, and the idea is dead. The idea is not dead. It's going to keep coming back, Congress after Congress, year after year, before it finally becomes a law, either much stronger or slightly different from how it started. We've woven into different bills, maybe broken up into chunks. So like one component will be passed every year, and in a very trickle-down effect that the media just is not equipped, because they do tend to be in a short cycle to kind of track over the 10 years what started out as this huge multi-part bill that died in a flaming ball of fire, has been broken out, and now every single component of it has passed over the past 10 years. So that, it's things do happen, they just don't necessarily happen at a visible level. Healthcare reform before the ACA passed, that was a 20-year-old idea.
Right. And I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because you're right. Like, it's not something that we hear all the time. Like, if there is something that we're very passionate about, we want to see it pass. And if it doesn't pass, it's like, that bill died. And then I imagine that also kind of dampens people's spirits and doesn't make them want to do a ton of advocacy at that moment. But to hear that actually, maybe it was too big in its original presentation, and then it's broken up over time and passed in smaller chunks, which in essence is kind of like what we do with therapy. We take big issues, break them up, and make them digestible or understandable over time. So I think that really helps us to hopefully be a little more patient and sorry, that ding is driving me insane. I don't know where it's coming from. A little more patient and a little bit more steadfast with our desire to do advocacy, because I think that's a theme that I keep hearing is you definitely have to be in it for the long haul. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And I think that's a really important point that you bring up, Dr. Ball, as well, which I think impairs a lot of psychologists and makes them nervous about going into advocacy, because they see like a contentious Supreme Court hearing or something, and they think that's what their experience is going to be like when they get on Capitol Hill. But they don't realize a lot of times that these staffers love psychologists in the community and other healthcare providers because they're coming at it, the issue, a lot of times from a nonpartisan perspective. So it's not threatening, and they can bring their knowledge base and the scientific rigor of their profession and place the issues that the staffers and the members of Congress are working on.
Awesome. So as we wrap up, I'm curious, is there anything that you would like to share with us that you feel like we should know, or a takeaway, a lovely gem that our viewership should be holding on to? Doris, you want to start us off?
I think we've kind of touched on this theme throughout the presentation, the conversation, but like really it takes a little bit of patience. That's I think we go in just expecting some, well, I don't know. It takes a balance of patience and impatience, right? Like, you don't want to be so quiet that and constantly waiting that it's easy to forget that you're not there, that you're there at all. I think one of the counterintuitive ways that I've started thinking about it is that you want to be so steady a presence that it becomes less about when you're in the room and when you're not in the room. Like there's that thing that people find themselves wondering, like, hey, how come I haven't heard from this person? So, and that can be different tones. And at times you'll have to be louder and at times you'll have to be quieter about it. But, you kind of just want to be steady and present. You kind of want to be a heartbeat. So when the heart stops, like, people panic. So that's really the takeaway, I think, that we don't really often get to discuss about, like, what it means when you're not being heard.
I think that's really important to think about too, because often we feel like we're not being heard. And that's why we're looking to our legislation to make changes, because we're asking for our voice to be shared. So I love that you put, like, you want to be the presence that people question when you're not there as well, not just when you are. So thank you for that. And Ben, how about for you? Any gems or nuggets that you want to have our viewership take away?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one, and hopefully I don't sound like a broken record, is I just really think that your voice is needed now more so than any time that I've ever been a part of on so many societal issues that affect our internally and external to psychology, but psychology is so relevant. And so it's such a great time to get involved. My chief, who was a longtime chief of staff on Capitol Hill, the senator she worked for had a saying that you're either at the table or you're on the menu when it comes to politics and Capitol Hill. And so just to impress upon those who are listening that, it will seem a little nerve-wracking at first, but this is really such an ideal time to become involved and make your voice heard.
Sorry about that. So I think that is so important to reiterate, like, you do have to be a presence and you have to make your voice heard, and you should be either in both places, at the table and on the menu. I think that's really important to share with our viewership. And I do really, really appreciate both of you coming on and sharing your time and talking about these topics, because I think we really have a desire to make changes on such a grand level, but never quite sure exactly how to get started and how to do it. So your thoughts, the information that you've shared has been so valuable, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you and really engage in some thoughtful dialogue about how APA members can really make a difference, and not only APA members, but psychology as a whole.
Absolutely. You've asked us some great questions. So thanks for giving us a chance to voice those thoughts we don't always have a chance to.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to come and join us this evening at TogetherWell. And with that, we'll say thank you and wrap up our evening.